Okay, well, I think we'll get started. We're going to open up this back wall. As people come in, they'll be able to sit over there. But good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. My name is Lisa Murata, and I have the pleasure of serving as the mayor of Rocky Hill. I would like to introduce our panel this evening. We have Representative Craig Fishbein, who is with us, and Representative Carrie Wood. Thank you both very much for your time and for coming to speak with us this evening. We also have some distinguished guests in the audience. We have Representative Tom Delnicki, and we have State Representative Jill Berry. I want to thank you both for coming out and sharing this time with us tonight. Just a few housekeeping matters. We will have our presenters, and then I have a list of folks who would like to speak. I think I put it up there. If you decide after folks have come up to speak that you now feel comfortable coming up, by all means, you will have an opportunity to get up. If you have comments, if you have questions of our state lawmakers, by all means, we encourage you to do that. It's meant to be an interactive, informal presentation this evening. Restrooms are right outside the door if anyone needs them. So you've probably noticed that there's been a lot of these forums going on in different municipalities, and I don't know if Representative Fishbein recognized how important these would come and that he'd be ending up going out on tour as a result around the state of Connecticut, but that seems to be what's happening. So we really appreciate your leadership, both of you and our state reps out there who are working hard to keep us informed about this topic. Just to give you a little bit of background, because Representative Wood obviously represents our district, and so we're opening the back. Representative Wood obviously represents our district, and she has a very intimate knowledge of what's going on here in Rocky Hill. But just to give some of our other state reps an idea of what we've been working on, and some of you who may not know, I mean, we've been working pretty hard the past 2 years talking about public safety, talking about car break-ins, theft of motor vehicles, theft from motor vehicles. And what we've done over the past 2 years is really try to keep the community engaged, working very hard at the local level, working hard to engage state lawmakers, working at the very grassroots levels, doing lock it or lose it, implementing some of those neighborhood watches. We established a tip line so that folks could feel comfortable about calling in if they see something suspicious. We've also funded the hiring of 3 additional police officers. We make sure that our police department is funded and that they have the resources they need. We're working on getting license plate readers to mount on our poles on more of our well-traveled roads and corridors. Over the summer, I was actually part of a small working group with COST, and I was able to meet with ranking members of public safety to discuss what's happening here in Rocky Hill. Most recently, I joined a special committee through CCM, which is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, and we have a new task force on violence prevention, recidivism, and community relations. And our goal, there's about 14 of us who are on this task force presently. It includes mayors and police chiefs from major cities, and we're working together to come up with some suggestions for lawmakers in the February session. But I think a lot of us right now are hoping that there's going to be a special session, and at least that's what we've been working on for the past year. We sent a resolution up to the governor all the way back in January, asking for help to bring this conversation to the table, to the forefront for everyone. And we didn't really get much traction through those sessions, so we were pushing for a special session. Number of us, and I want to thank Representative Delnicki, Representative Wood, Deputy Mayor Sharma, and our counselors, Prakash and Levine. We went up to the Capitol. We delivered our petitions. We had about 1,000 signatures from folks asking for a special session. So we will continue to do our part here in Rocky Hill, and I really want to thank you guys for coming out and letting us know what you guys are doing and taking the questions and the feedback. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks, everyone.
I set you up, so, in a good way. Oh, you did that very well. Oh. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Carrie, for having us here tonight. I think Representative Turco's back there in the back, so thank you for coming also. You know, in the legislature, I don't represent this town. I represent Wallingford and Cheshire presently. I'm the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, which every committee is made up of Republicans and Democrats for the most part. The head of the Democratic caucus of a committee is the chairman of that committee. The head of the Republican caucus is the ranking member. So you hear that term a lot. A lot of people don't know what that is, so that just explains. So tonight we're going to talk about juvenile justice. You know, across the nation, specifically with regard to Connecticut, on a daily basis, we see the articles in the newspaper, we see it on the internet, we hear it on the radio and the TV, very scary incidents involving juvenile justice, crimes committed by children. And tonight we're going to talk about some of those specific crimes, the laws, proposed changes. But I want to give you a roadmap of where we're going to go tonight. We're going to talk about the data. A lot of people talk about, you know, let's look at the data. What does it actually show? We're going to talk about the reforms that have been instituted by the legislature over the last 10 years. Such things as determining when a child is a juvenile for adjudication in juvenile court or adult court. When can a court order a child be detained? When can a case be transferred from the juvenile court to the adult court? Some of the miscellaneous reforms. What options the police have when they come in contact with a juvenile they think may have committed a crime. Ordinarily, when I give this presentation, there's a report from local police. We're not going to have that tonight, so please pardon that portion of the agenda. We're going to talk about some proposed new reforms that I'm going to present to you, and I believe Representative Wood will have some others. We're going to talk about what you could do to advance some of the reforms proposed by both of us, and then we'll have questions and answers. Okay? So let's look at the data. On a daily basis, you hear in Connecticut that you're safer. This graph looks at violent crime, comparing the United States to Connecticut. And this is what a lot of people rely upon in saying you are safer in Connecticut. The upper line is the national average. The lower line is Connecticut. And you see that generally, nationally, 10 years ago or so, it's sort of ended up where it is today. So basically flat, whereas Connecticut generally going down. But that's violent crime. And violent crime, by statistic analysis, is such things as murder, rape, sex assault, those kinds of things, those physical contact, violent crimes. But it doesn't have anything at all to do with property crimes. And many times property crimes, especially motor vehicle theft, there's collaterals. You know, there's other cars that are hit, there's racing on the highway. There are multitudes of victims many times when you have such property crimes. So I want to focus on the property crimes. And this is the same sort of chart dealing with property crimes. Same period of time, national average in Connecticut. So generally, nationally, property crime is going down, right? But look at the this portion right here, Connecticut, how we had the dip and then the dramatic increase, right? That's generally where we are now, and that's what you're seeing in the news, that dramatic increase. So we're going to examine this a little bit closer. This graph looks at motor vehicle theft arrests, just arrests for right now, of adults compared to juveniles, okay? The white line is adults, the yellow line is juveniles. And you see how about 2017 or so, we have this dip with adults. But generally 2015 with juveniles, we're generally going up in arrests, okay? So let's unpack that data a little bit further. Now, looking at 2010, there were 667 just arrests for motor vehicle theft. 143 of those were of juveniles. Merely 6 years later, there was 852 arrests for motor vehicle theft, 28% increase. But 278 of those were of juveniles, almost doubled in 6 years. You're going to see many of the reforms are going into place that period of time. And as we go through the years that follow, you see increase. And these are just arrests of juveniles increasing. 131% increase, 101, so we went down a little bit, 66%, 70% last year, okay? Just about double, not really, okay? That's where we are now with just arrests. Now, understanding that the clearance rate on motor vehicle thefts is very low. And what I mean by clearance rate is somebody complains that a car is stolen, a perpetrator is identified, individual is arrested, case is adjudicated, okay? Clearance rate. Every one of those cases that does that is a cleared case. The clearance rate on motor vehicle theft is very low. It's about 7% last year, okay? So we're just dealing with arrests right now. So let's look at the actual incidents. I thank you, Mayor, for this large screen. Some of you can actually read it. Usually we can't. But, in fact, I can't even read it here. You'll see in 2011, the amount of incidents of motor vehicle theft complaint was about 6,600 complaints, right? Last year, it was 8,500 complaints in Connecticut, okay? So, those are the numbers. We can't argue with the numbers. That's the data. But then we have the chart. So once again, using the same methodology, this chart down the bottom, the red line is the national average, Connecticut is the blue line, right? And you'll see towards the end here, this upward nationally, but look at this dramatic increase here in Connecticut, okay? The numbers, 12% increase nationally. Connecticut, 41% increase. 4 times the national average. Motor vehicle theft incidents in Connecticut. So when we talk about, well, it must be the pandemic, you all know the pandemic wasn't just in Connecticut, right? It was across the country. But Connecticut 4 times. So that's the data. That's what it shows. That's what you're not hearing about, okay? Motor vehicle thefts. So the reforms. Let's look at the reforms that happened over the last decade. One of the things that the courts had to deal with initially is determining when a child could be arrested, right? What's the minimum age to arrest a child? And originally there was no minimum age. It was police discretion. Certainly if a 5-year-old playing with matches burns down their house, you're not going to arrest them for arson, right? Police officer discretion. But then that discretion was taken away. And the legislature said you had to be at least 7 years of age to be arrested for anything. Just last year, that was raised even further. 2021, the minimum age to arrest a child became 10. I'll tell you that the proposal was 12. I didn't find that to be appropriate, and we argued over it. We ended up with 10. I know that proposal is going to be made again this year to raise it to 12, but that's where we are presently, is you have to be at least 10 years or older to be arrested for any crime in Connecticut. So once we've established the minimum age, we have to deal with what's the maximum age, right? To parse out between adult court and juvenile court. Well, prior to January 1, 2010, for juvenile court, it was a person under the age of 16 at the time of the commission of any offense. But after January 1 of 2010, it was a person under the age of 16 at the time of commission of any offense, and some 16-year-olds charged with certain offenses went to juvenile court. Then it changed again in 2012. It was a person under the age of 16 at the time of the commission of any offense, and some 17-year-olds charged with certain offenses. That's where we are presently. Some 16-year-olds, some 17-year-olds go to juvenile court. That's the majority of them, actually. Presently, based upon a single set of facts, particular incident, a juvenile can be charged in the same case as an adult as well as a juvenile. That's where we left at this point. You know, I'll tell you in my experience in speaking with law enforcement, the 16, 17 graying of the system made it a little bit cumbersome, a little bit difficult. You know, sometimes you see undercharging in these cases based upon whether or not it's an automatic transfer to the adult court based upon their age. So, but that's where we are presently. So, transfers to adult court. We hear a lot about that. How come this juvenile was not tried as an adult? Before 2012, juveniles age 14 and older charged with a Class A or B felony or arson murder were automatically transferred from juvenile court to adult court. With those that were 14 and over charged with other crimes, there was discretionary transfer. A prosecutor would apply to the court to discretionarily transfer it, and the court would have a probable cause hearing. The judge would make that determination. But in 2012, the legislature added another test on this discretionary transfer statute. They said, you know, even if probable cause is found, the court still has to make a determination and a finding that it's in the best interest of the child to transfer the case to the adult court, which is very problematic. I was part of a panel last night of the Bar Association talking about these issues, and it was a judge, a prosecutor, a public defender, and myself, and we were wrestling over that language because it's a very, very high bar to meet with the discretionary transfers. And in 2015, the legislature raised the minimum age to transfer a case from 14 to 15. So presently, a 14-year-old charged for any crime in Connecticut cannot be transferred to the adult court, no matter the charge. And also that year took the Class B felonies out of the automatic transfer statute and made it discretionary. So a lot of those don't get transferred to adult court because of that hurdle that I gave you. This is a case that happened in New Britain. You may have heard about where a 13, 14, and a 16-year-old attacked a female delivery worker. They blinded and maimed her. And because of their ages, they could not be tried in adult court. And you're going to see when we get to the penalty portion of my presentation why that is significant. The penalties in adult court are significantly higher than those in juvenile court. So we hear a lot about detention orders. You know, child gets arrested for stealing a car, and then they get arrested for stealing another car the next night. And, you know, public says, well, how come they were out? Or how come they weren't detained? So we want to talk about detention orders. So first of all, a child cannot be detained unless a court orders it. A judge has to review and order the detention. So somebody has to apply for that. Now, previously, to detain a juvenile, there had to be probable cause that was found. The court had to determine there was no less restrictive alternative available, and one of the following: strong probability the child will run away, strong probability the child will commit other offenses injurious to the child or the community, probable cause to believe that the child's continued residence in the home poses a risk to the child, or based upon the serious nature or risk to the community, need to hold the child for another jurisdiction, the child has failed to respond to the court process, or the child has violated the conditions of release. That's where we started with transfers. So there was a lot that a judge could choose from here to order a transfer. But then the legislature started to peel those things back. And in 2017, they took away strong probability the child will run away. That didn't matter anymore. Took out the clause injurious to the child. But then, most importantly, at least to me in my experience, that the child had violated the conditions of release. So if previously they had been adjudicated or arraigned and a judge released them and said, don't go back to that house or stay away from that person, and they violated it, that could be part of a detention prior to this change. The legislature took it out. Then it changed some more. 2018, we still had the probable cause, you have to have probable cause in a criminal case. But then the legislature added this word appropriate, adjective really, which is subjective. What's appropriate to me is not necessarily appropriate to you. Appropriate, less restrictive alternative available, which, makes it more cumbersome. And one of the following, probable cause, a level of risk to the child will pose to public safety if released, cannot be managed in a less restrictive setting. Need to hold for compliance with the court process, need to hold for another jurisdiction. That's what we're left with. When we originally had that menu of many things, they peeled it back, and this is what we're left with for detention orders, okay? Now, up until the end of the summer, before September 1, one of the problems that we had with detention orders is an officer, the only thing they had available to them to apply for a detention order was that particular arrest. So you arrest a child on a Saturday night for stealing a car. And you're thinking as an officer, I might want to apply for a detention order. Well, the only thing the officer would have access to is that particular arrest. They wouldn't know that the night before he got arrested for stealing another car, and maybe 2 weeks before they got arrested for stealing another car, because these cases are sealed. There was no way to get to that. So this is one of the things that I've been pushing for since July, is to give them access so that they can get a holistic report to a judge to get this order. And the judicial branch did agree, starting September 1, to make available, first of all, they came up with a form for an officer to be able to apply to get access to that record. And a juvenile probation officer as well as a bail commissioner were made available so that officers could get that information. Very important. I think that was a step forward. I know that it has assisted in some detention orders, but this is the menu, those 1, 2, 3, and 3 basically, that a court would have to make the determination of in order to order detention of a juvenile. In 2018, there were some additional changes. Juveniles could not be held for more than 6 hours. So an officer pulls over a car with 4 juveniles in it, the car's stolen. They detain the 4 juveniles and start their investigation. Well, the clock starts to run on 6 hours. They've got to figure out that case in 6 hours. Otherwise, they have to release the juveniles. That went into place in 2018. The juvenile justice programs in Connecticut got shifted from DCF to the judicial branch into CSSD. The CJTS, which was basically the place that juveniles would go when they were convicted, was slated to close. It was slated for June 30th of 2018. However, Governor Malloy closed it early based upon the declining rate of juvenile and young adult arrests. So that facility in Middletown is presently vacant, not used for anything. But as a result of closing CJTS, committed juveniles were released home or placed in staff-secure, unlocked facilities. You know, I've represented kids. I'm a lawyer, so I've represented children at that were at CJTS. The first time I was asked to go there, you know, I don't want to go to a prison. I thought very scary thoughts about the facility. I was pleasantly surprised by what I saw, and I think it would be important if you saw what CJTS looks like. That's the front. Looks similar to a church to me. It's the best picture that we have of residence quarters. Of course, it was a secure facility, so there was security inside and outside, but also job skill training going on there. $59 million was spent in creating and establishing that facility that is presently not being used since 2018. One of the other things that got changed in 2018 was the maximum sentence served by individuals in juvenile court, which I said we would get to. So before July 1 of 2018, the maximum commitment was 18 months with a possible extension of another 18 months for a total of 36 months. But after July 1, 2018, adjudicated juveniles were discharged with or without a warning, put on supervised probation or probation with residential placement for up to 30 months. That is the maximum sentence that one who is adjudicated in juvenile court can serve. In 2019, there were some additional changes. Well, first of all, in recognition of motor vehicle theft and juveniles and the beginning of the increase, we created a diversionary program, which allows, when an adult goes to court, many times we get accelerated rehabilitation. There's the alcohol education program. There was no program for motor vehicle theft for juveniles. So this is a program that first-time individual can apply to be part of. Cases put on hold for about 6 months. There's classes they have to attend. And at the end, should they complete that, the case is dismissed. Hopefully that addresses recidivism and we're not seeing that kid, thereafter. The other thing it did was, when we looked at detention orders and posing a risk to public safety was one of the components. We made it an automatic determination that a juvenile poses a risk to public safety if they've been convicted of 2 felonies, have been on probation twice, and are now charged with theft of a motor vehicle. So you didn't have to have all those hurdles with regard to a detention order. But as you can see, that's a pretty long list in order to get there. In 2021, we made some additional changes. We created a new crime, enticing a minor. We hear with these motor vehicle thefts that it's perhaps gang activity, where adult members of the gang are getting these kids to steal cars. Well, that's okay. Let's go after that, enticing a minor. But you'll see that one of the things that we wrestled over is what is an adult for the purposes of being charged with that crime. And the only thing we could agree upon was 23. So in order to be charged with enticing a minor, you had to be at least 23 years old. So if a 22-year-old is out there, coercing kids to steal cars, cannot be charged with enticing a minor. But we did create that law. One of the things that, judges, when they get appointed, they come before my committee and we ask them questions. And upon reappointment, we have an opportunity to ask them about their career as a lawyer. And I started to ask questions this last session, have you had these detention orders and have you denied any and why? And judges would admit that they had denied some, but they didn't recall, why. And, I didn't drill down because, nobody was keeping that data. So we passed a law that said the judicial branch should be starting to keep that data. How many of those are sought and how many are denied so that we can start to examine that. As I mentioned before, we raised the minimum age for arrest of a child from 7 to 10. There was another bill that came up, at least in the House, on June 2nd, an attempt to do some other stuff in this last session. It permitted a judge to order a DCF investigation if a child had been already convicted of a felony and they're charged with another felony, stealing a car, stealing a gun, or committing a violent crime using a deadly weapon. Right now, a judge does not discretionarily have that power, so we wanted that. Also, if that investigation is to occur and there's a possibility the child's going to be removed from the family, that the family be given information about free legal services in their community that's in a language that they can actually read and write. It made an automatic determination on that risk to public safety that we talked about if they're charged with stealing a firearm or a violent offense involving a deadly weapon or carjacking. It ordered home arrest of a juvenile who had been arrested for stealing a motor vehicle, and then they're out awaiting trial, and they got arrested for stealing another motor vehicle. And it eliminated that 6-hour hold provision that I talked about before. That bill did get voted on. It was defeated 88 to 57. There was only 4 Democrats that supported. A couple of them are here tonight: Kerry Wood, Joe Barry. The other 2 are Frank Smith and Mary Mashinsky. But that proposal did die. That's what happened in the 2021 session, just to bring you up to date. So, what options do the police have with a juvenile who's believed to commit a crime presently? They could warn the child, take no further action. They could refer the child to a JRB or to other agency for services. A JRB, just so that you guys know, every community has some sort of alternative resolution body instead of going to court. I know in my particular town, Youth and Social Services handles these children, and I had them. I'm also on my local town council. I had them before our town council a few months ago, and we were talking about what kind of things you do with a kid who gets caught graffitiing the neighbor's fence or something like that. You make them clean it up, write an apology note, something like that. You don't throw them in the court system. So usually with these low-level stuff, JRBs involved or some sort of local agency instead of our courts, and the police have that option. They could charge the child with a crime and just release the child to their own recognizance. They could charge the child with the crime, release the child to an adult or a guardian and refer the case to the court. They could arrest the child and then seek one of those detention orders that we talked about, and then detain the child if that detention order is granted, and they would go to either Hartford or Bridgeport. We have 2 detention places. I do have some photographs. I just want to, and we were talking about this in the panel discussion last night, neither one of these facilities is set up for like long-term anything. They are detention facilities, and as of this year, they're not going to be called detention facilities anymore. They're going to be called residential facilities, just so that you know, so if you hear that term in the future. So I do have some photographs. Most of the photographs, I will admit, are of Hartford, the Hartford Juvenile Detention Facility. It is a secure facility, so there is security and that kind of stuff. So I want to give you a hypothetical case. A 12-year-old's arrested for assault 3 and breach of peace for punching a 12-year-old in the face without provocation at school. 12-year-olds thereafter arrested for assault 3 and disorderly for assaulting another student on the school bus and punching the victim in the face, then getting on top of the victim and continuing to strike him. Thereafter, the 13-year-old is arrested for assault in third and so on and so forth for a fight at his mother's residence. After he hits his mother in the face, he proceeds to spit on, slap, and pull the mother's hair. He then grabs a knife and threatens to kill everyone in the home. After turning 14, the youth is arrested for various things after officers responded to a report that he was throwing knives at family members. The incident began when the grandmother questioned him about a bullet hole in his bedroom wall. About a month later, the 14-year-old is a suspect in the investigation of a non-fatal shooting. And a few weeks later, as a result of a separate incident, the 14-year-old is arrested for murder. That's our hypothetical facts here. So we're going to take our hypothetical, we're going to dispose of it through our court system as it presently exists. So first of all, because the accused is under the age of 18, they come to juvenile court. Because they're under the age of 15, the case cannot be transferred to adult court, it has to stay in juvenile court. If the juvenile is convicted of murder, as well as the other crimes that you saw up there, the maximum penalty is a total of 30 months supervised probation. At the age of 22, 4 years after reaching the age of 18, the case conviction is erased off of his record. Mandatory erasure based upon him just sending a letter to the juvenile court. It's not discretionary. There is no, ordinarily, if convicted as an adult of those things, you would go to the Board of Pardons and Paroles that I've represented people before, where you tell them your life has changed, this is how it's changed, I'm doing things in my community, please erase stuff off my record. But here, this is automatic. That is our current system. The problem is, how do you explain that to the grieving family that lost their murdered loved one, or the other things that are going on here? That's the system, but I'm going to tell you that that's not a hypothetical. That case is actually going on today in Connecticut. I did take half of the arrests out of the list. And that young man, early on, he was identified as having problems. And he was in school, they put him in a special school. There's only 3 other children in his classroom, so he's getting some individualized attention. The police department had recognized that he likes to play basketball, very interested in basketball, so they hooked up with a professional trainer for basketball. Unfortunately, he wouldn't make the appointments for the training. So they did try to get him some services, and it's just it's a tragedy. But the dispensation of the case is also very difficult to deal with. As I mentioned, we usually have local police, but I'm going on past that. And I just have some proposed reforms that we've been asking for to have in a special session, so I just want to go through those before we get to Carrie. So first of all, that 6-hour time limit thing, we would have it flex. If an officer is conducting in good faith an investigation, they're not done, or they apply for one of those detention orders, we wouldn't have it so draconian that they have to release the youths if they haven't gotten a report from the judge on whether or not that's going to be granted. We would have, if the request to deny or detain was denied, that within 24 hours of that denial that a judge articulate in writing why they denied it. So maybe there's problems with the system, problem with the investigation of these cases. Presently, a juvenile who's arrested for a crime, they, under the statute, have to be arraigned no more than 14 days after the arrest. a lot of bad things can happen in 14 days with these kids, right? So we would have expedited arraignments on certain crimes. I have the list there. I'm just going to, for a felony, Class A misdemeanor, charge involving loss of life or serious physical injury, a sex assault, or an offense involving use of a firearm. Not stealing a pack of gum, but the serious stuff. In 1983, Connecticut said, we're going to take domestic violence seriously in this state. We're going to have next day arraignments. Well, let's do it with this stuff. I'm going to tell you that I did get an email from Judge Patrick Carroll a few weeks ago, he's the head of the judicial branch. And I will tell you that they are working on this. And I do expect this to be instituted administratively at the beginning of the year. There will have to be some statutory fixes to totally put it in place, but I think we're going to get to the finish line on that one.
Just the one or all three?
No, just on that one, expedited arraignments, yeah. When I met with DCF a few months ago to talk about these proposals and many others, I learned that apparently Connecticut has more diversionary programs for these kids than any other state. Well, I want to get them into a program quickly. A lot of times, they're arraigned 2 weeks later, and then, they're assigned a public defender, case is set down, and come back in 3 months, whatever. 3 months after that, they get into a program. Well, if these programs work, which I know some of them do, okay, I would like to get them into a program at the time of arraignment. So on the day of arraignment, first time in court, have them sit down with family relations, what program fits this kid, let's get him in there. So that would be part of our changes as well. Presently, larceny has various steps to it based upon the value. So if I owned a Lamborghini and my next door neighbor had a Volkswagen Beetle and they were both stolen, the charge is different based upon the value of the vehicle. And I would offer to you, with all due respect to the Lamborghini owners in the world, that I think the collateral consequences to the Volkswagen Beetle owner are probably higher than those who own the Lamborghini. The senior citizen getting themselves to their medical appointment, mom bringing their kids to school, those are all impacted. Both people have collaterals, but I would have motor vehicles taken out of the larceny statute, and let's create a new category, stealing a motor vehicle, and keep them all the same, right? And then you can just treat that larceny different. And our proposal is to have the first offense be a Class A misdemeanor, and a second or subsequent offense be a Class B felony, which would be possible for a discretionary transfer using the standard that I gave to you before. Understanding that most of these cases, the first stealing of a motor vehicle is disposed of through that diversionary program, right? The case is dismissed. So the second is really, the first conviction is usually the second actual incident, right? And so on and so forth. So we'd also have GPS monitoring of if one is arrested for stealing a car, they're released, they get arrested for stealing another car, GPS monitoring. Right now, I mentioned to you about the diversionary programs and that we have so many. Nobody has done a report on what they are, what they do, and the recidivism rate tied to them. I think that's really important to get done, and it's really only the legislature that can direct the judicial branch to do that report. Through COVID, I know a lot of kids have got some mental health issues, right? A lot of kids had them before COVID, but it's certainly escalated through that. And I think we need to shift some monies and some workings to some of that stuff. So we need to look at the programs that we currently have. So we would have the report done so that we can closely examine. You know, presently, that when a juvenile is arrested for, let's say, stealing a car, the case is adjudicated not where the incident happened, but where the juvenile resides, which is problematic for a couple of reasons. First of all, the scenario. You get a kid from, let's say, Meriden, travels to, I don't know, Chaplin, steals a car, right? Arrested by the Chaplin, well, it would be state police because they have a resident state trooper. State police arrest him in Chaplin. That case is going to be adjudicated in the Meriden court as opposed to Chaplin. Now, what does that do? First of all, it negatively impacts the victim. The victim wants to come talk to the prosecutor. It isn't their local courthouse they're going to. They got to travel to Meriden. The other thing is you've got an investigating officer who is stationed in Chaplin, right? For the trial or for whatever proceedings, right? They got a probable cause hearing. He's got to go from there to Meriden to testify. We would have these cases adjudicated where the incident happened, as they do with adult cases. And then we got to look at CJTS to do something with that facility. At the very least, employment programs, or I get these calls from moms, just so frustrated. I was speaking with a mom yesterday who her son keeps on leaving the house like 2 o'clock in the morning, and she knows he's not doing anything good. And she's like, what can I do? Can I put a GPS bracelet on him? Oh, really not, Is there some place that I can bring him? No, there really isn't. There's not a lot of guidance that I can give her. Perhaps if we just looked at that facility for some sort of outlet, maybe there's just $59 million was used to make that building, and we should be using it for something. And I bring no ideas to the table. As you see, the proposal says that others examine it, come to us with some suggestions. So those are just some proposed reforms that I wanted to present to you tonight. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Carrie. You're on here, right? Yeah.
Perfect. Yep.
Okay. So I can, do this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, is that yours?
Sure. Go.
I can.
You just, yeah. Just, and then if you want to go back, it's the other arrow.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I just have a few 50-page slide presentation for you. I'm just kidding. Craig and I haven't seen each other's presentations before, so because he did such a wonderful job, I'm skipping over a ton of mine. Let me just see how I do this. View. Can I get you up here for a second? Sorry. Can you just start it? And then I want to skip ahead. So can you start it from a different spot?
Here?
Can you go down? You start it there.
Okay, you switched it up
Perfect.
this time.
Over here, full screen.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to pull out some information that we haven't seen, and I wanted to pull out car thefts in Rocky Hill, and I compared us to Wethersfield because I think our communities are similarly impacted. If you look at 2018, you'll see in Rocky Hill we had 26 car thefts, and in Wethersfield 68. This number went down in 2019. We went down to 21 in Rocky Hill, went down to about 40 in Wethersfield. And then what we're here today for and what we're trying to work on is the increase that happened recently where these numbers have gone up. And I want to point out Hartford car thefts to show that this activity has transitioned from our cities into the suburbs. So in 2018, 706, 2019, 500, And then you would expect a large increase in 2020, but it only went up slightly. Still more than we'd like to see. So I just want to talk about some of the things that Representative Fishbein talked about, which are some of the actions that we did take. Number one, that was announced at a forum that we had at Elm Ridge Park, was allowing police departments to share juvenile records, which was not going on before, so that took place this year. We also provided overtime funding to police departments with the towns that had the most significant uptick in car thefts. That went into place in September and goes till the end of the year. I know in Central Connecticut, the police department started a juvenile car theft task force. They are doing wonderful work. The numbers that Representative Barry and I saw recently were that they're making 4 out of 5 arrests. And they're also collecting data and sharing that amongst departments, and they just have a lot more resources with that money. Also in 2021, there is a ton of data collection going on to make sure that the courts are operating correctly. We heard complaints from law enforcement that this motion to detain would be denied. We want to know why and dig into what we can further do about that. In our current budget that was passed this year, this actually went out to RFP, which is additional money for something called a credible messaging program. And this program works to reduce court system recidivism and gang violence among youth. So there is a lot of money dedicated in this current budget to this messaging program. We also heard about the bill about enticing a juvenile is now a criminal act. And we are also studying the time frame from arrest to appearance in court, and we have gotten some positive feedback, as Representative Fishbein said, from Judge Carroll on streamlining that process. So, again, Representative Fishbein and I have not seen each other's presentations. What I am showing you today is based on a working group from people within our caucus that are working towards some solutions and hopefully getting the rest of our caucus on board. So one of that would be this additional funding to the Department of Emergency Services, which went into our regional task force and making sure that we're sharing best practices, because what's happening in the Hartford region, even though it's a positive story, is not happening in the Valley. It is not happening in Eastern Connecticut. So we have put together a system that works. What can we do to share that across other departments and other areas? We're in agreement on the removing or extending the 6-hour hold period, which would give law enforcement additional tools when seeking to detain. Also working with the judicial branch on speeding up arraignments, and GPS monitoring for repeat offenders. And I just want to explain a little bit on GPS monitoring, because this is not an ankle bracelet. Ankle bracelet monitoring, the problem with that is if an ankle bracelet goes on during the week and a juvenile then takes the ankle bracelet off on a Friday and is out all weekend, they do not see their probation officer until Monday. So this time went by where they were supposed to be detained within home or within school or within their work environment. The GPS allows a 24-hour response, again, focused on repeat offenders. Additional challenges to consider. I think gun violence is escalating. We saw an incident here in Rocky Hill last night that I think a lot of us are concerned about. Streamlining the courts. We just got a great presentation from Representative Fishbein on loopholes that need to be closed, and reducing recidivism by looking at these programs. Again, I think we are in agreement on making sure that we're investing in programs that work. Some other things to consider in this 2021 session, which we were very lucky. We had a budget that was benefiting from our federal dollars, from ARPA dollars, and we have more money than we have seen in a very long time, and we're not sure how long that is going to last. So we made sure that programs were funded in a meaningful way. So I do want to highlight that $1.6 billion is going towards our cities in bonding projects over the next 10 years. And this will revitalize brownfields, provide more housing options, and encourage more home ownership. Mental health will be one of the top topics of this legislative session, which you will hear constantly. More resources and more staffing in this sector to make sure children and their families are receiving the services and the help that they need. Additionally, jobs training. Here in Connecticut, if you're in a job that you don't like and you want to transfer your career or learn a new skill, you're able to do that here. And not only that, we will pay for your daycare needs if that's a need that you require. So making sure that jobs training is available to anyone that needs it and that the high school to job pipeline continues. We also have apprenticeship training and funding. And some of the biggest ways that we've ever done, you do not need to go to a four-year university. You can get a skill right out of high school, make $60,000 a year, and in your late 20s be making up to $90,000 a year in advanced manufacturing. Also, we put money into scholarships for people of color to enter the teaching profession. We have seen the lowest numbers of people of color moving into that profession, and making sure we have people in that profession and making sure teachers are representative of the students they serve. So those are some of the things, and I just left this as the last slide because we're really talking about poverty with a lot of these issues. And while we've put some things into place here, there's still a lot more room for improvement. Thank you.
Well, thank you both very much. That was incredibly informative. And I'm going to open it up now for a public comment. I'm going to go by our list. We have only 5 folks who have signed up. And then we will open it up if anyone else wishes to speak. I would just ask that you come up to the podium. So
there was a sign-out sheet.
is there a second one?
There.
That's good.
Yes.
Perfect. So that's our second one. So we're going to begin with Mr. Brian Donahue.
Thank you. One of the things, I have been a social worker with children for over almost 28 years now, close to 29. And the pictures of the CJTS, that I wouldn't recognize that building if I was just looking at these pictures. I've been to CJTS. I'm wondering why these meetings are occurring outside of Hartford, outside of Waterbury, outside of outside of Bridgeport, outside of Stamford. I'm wondering why there's no talk of, except until Representative Wood came out, there wasn't really talk about what it was more of a punishment, and I'm not excusing crimes, but what are we doing for individuals who are poor, I attended the first meeting in the park that day. And one of the things that really upset me was the fact that there was talk of racial profiling. And I have 2 children. I have 3 children, but 2 of them are black. And I'll be darned if that's going to happen. I think that we need to come to as a community and work. I also attended a meeting in Glastonbury. And there was also all the talk, and I've seen it online in other communities. And really what's just happening is this blaming of children, and kids should be blamed if they committed a crime, but where's the mental health? Where's the services? We need to start getting our kids earlier the help that they need. And only through getting the help that they need will we be able to stop future problems as they come up. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call up Mr. Steve Harvey, please.
Thank you for the time. I've been to a couple of these meetings already, and I had prepared something, but after I did a lot of studying before we had the meeting in the park and the meeting we had with the town. And I even found out more information today than I didn't know before. I have some questions. How did those 88 people live with themselves when they can't use some common sense? A lot of what we're seeing is, and I don't disagree with what Brian just said. There needs to be efforts put in up front. But those are not mutually exclusive issues. We're talking about criminals who are specifically in town who are stealing cars. That was the thing that prompted this thing, which got it rolling, and it's been going on. There's people in this town. The mayor brought up a proposal to have a special session before the election. You know what this is called? Stuffing something under the table. Why? Because if the legislators had a vote, okay, then the people in their communities would know that they're basically voting for criminals. We're not talking about the one-shot deals. We're talking about my neighbor who got robbed twice. We had the person pictured on the camera. 2 days later, he stole a car and ran over and killed a guy in New Britain. Okay? 13 arrests. There's no freaking reason in the world why that guy should have been out. I don't care what the laws are. And I'll tell you, the lawyers who put those laws together, I hope they burn in hell because they don't know what they're doing. The people in this town and places all over this state are up to here with this stuff. We're going to have a special session. We're going to do it the next time. How many more people? Last night, perfect example. Okay? How many more people or incidences are going to happen before, one, God forbid, another person gets killed, or we get off of our butts as a community and get people to change? I don't care. When we had the meeting in the park, we were talking about criminals. That's all. We didn't say where they were from. We didn't say anything. We were talking about people coming into our town, which we all love, and basically having our privacy, our houses invaded, and our cars stolen. And when you look up where the laws were changed to make it easier for these people, I don't know about you guys, but I'm like up to here with it. Get to the point where you almost just want to say, oh, the hell with it, I'm not going to worry about it anymore. But we can't do that. We got to keep pushing. We can't wait till the next election to put these people's feet to the fire. They have to do something. You know, and the other question, the question that I did have more than anything else, which I wanted to talk about, is at the last meeting, the police chief gave his, his report, and we got all the statistics and everything, which was fantastic. But one thing that was brought up was the lobby for pushing. Now, as I understand it, the lobby for the juveniles, okay, they want to move most of the ages from 18 to 21. I wish if you guys could confirm that or not, because I don't know if it's true and I don't want to be speaking wrong, but I understand that that's the case. If they're already pushing it from 18 to 21 for some of these crimes, it's going to get worse. And the other question I have is, and you mentioned the age of 23 was where you had to, that's where you guys bartered that you could agree. 21 is when you can do things legally. Why are we letting criminals at 21 and 22 get away with stuff because 23 is a mandatory age? It's ridiculous. How does anybody sleep with themselves when they pass something like that? If you guys put that to a vote to the people in the state, they'd probably put it down at 18, not 23. But nobody knows about it. Did anybody in this room know about it, that it was 23 beforehand? I don't think so. Thank you.
Just to answer the question, yes, I believe I've had discussions that they do want to raise it to 21. So.
Thank you.
It's a powerful lobby, correct?
I mean, the makeup of the legislature presently is slanted. I mean, you look at the vote on that particular bill, which, you know, some would think is innocuous. It was 88 to 57. So you don't need a lobby if, you know, 88 of the people in the House are voting against that stuff. So I can't typify a particular group of lobbyists as being powerful, given the makeup. So.
Thank you. Mr. Gabe Cabrera. Gabe Cabrera.
Most of you are familiar with my experience in town relative to the two incidents that I had at my home this year. So I'm not going to get into that. I do echo what Steve Harvey said at the podium a few minutes ago. Comment for me, basically, you know, I do appreciate the Rocky Hill leadership that's here, that's pushing this forward and getting an audience with the state legislators who are here. And you know, your presentations are, you know, very compelling. I'm just wondering, how do the juvenile laws in Connecticut compare to all the states in the country? I mean, are we on the liberal, you know, side of the spectrum? Are we conservative? Where do we fall in? Because it seems like every possible pass and every leniency available to juveniles is supported in the state. And I'm just wondering, are we, you know, mavericks in liberalism here in Connecticut, or you know, are other states take matters more seriously and address them with harsher penalties and laws? So I'm just wondering, and I don't know that the folks here can address that issue, but I'm really interested to find out, you know, where we stand.
I mean, it's sort of a subjective analysis, you know. I can tell you that juvenile laws or juvenile justice program compared to other states, you know, it's a finely crafted mosaic. There's so many different pieces, and then to say, well, you know, New York has this bar, but Connecticut has, you know, we have our own different court system, you know, so it's very difficult to compare. I can say that things have certainly changed over the last, you know, I've been practicing 20 years, right? And I can tell you that, you know, we were talking about this last night during the forum. I had a case a couple years ago where a 13-year-old child threatened to kill his sister. And I can tell you that a decade ago, that child would have gone through the system. And that child probably would not be better off for going through the system. And in that particular case, you know, DCF has changed over the last decade. Policing has changed over the last decade. That young man didn't end up going through the system. He didn't get arrested. He got some help. And they found out through the help that he was being sexually molested by someone else, by an adult. And it was his way of acting out. And he got some help. And I think because of those changes, that kid's going to be better off 20 years from now. That's a good story. There are other bad stories. But it's very difficult for me to say, you know, that Connecticut is the liberal champion of the country. You know, tonight's presentation, I tried to show you, you know, I cast no dispersions. I bring to you the facts. This is the law. Apply it. Do you think it makes sense? I think we need to change some things. I gave you some proposals. I think one of the other things is to get that best interest of the child out of the discretionary transfer statute, because it's a very high bar that you can't make. But the system has gotten somewhat better and it's gotten somewhat worse. It's the best I can tell you.
Thank you. Brian Clemens.
Take it easy. I worked for the District Branch for 26 years until I retired recently. Mostly in our court system, and a lot of juvenile court. Saw firsthand how these laws over the last 10 years changed how much it handcuffed the courts. Closing the training school, closing of the New Haven Whaley Avenue juvenile facility. There's 2 detention facilities in the state. They're not big. These juveniles know they can't be held. That's why there's crimes being committed. They know it. Talked about the kid with 13 car arrests. He's one of a dozen that I know of, that I dealt with, who had multiple, dozens, stolen car offenses that elevated to a violent crime, to murder, to victim homicide. until we get someplace to house the truly bad ones, and they're not all truly bad, kids make mistakes, we all know the juveniles, they make mistakes. But the ones that are, you know, fifth, sixth, seventh, a dozen stolen cars. Until we change these laws, it's gonna get worse. You know, and we didn't discuss anything about another problem we have in town, where people going into cars and stealing items out of the car, not the car itself. Going through, rummaging through cars, breaking windows and steal stuff out of cars. That was a huge problem, not our town, but everywhere else. And it's juveniles. We know it, and they know it. Because they know they can't be touched because of the laws being changed in the last 10 years. Why we haven't had a special session, which everyone's been calling for, I do not know why. Perhaps one of the representatives can tell us why they won't call for one. Almost every town has asked for a special session to deal with these crimes and gone on deaf ears. That's what I'm concerned about. Why are our legislators won't do anything about this?
So
Some of the proposed laws I saw this year were atrocious. One was, he'll write a letter of apology if they steal a car. Really? That was from a senator from our district. That was an embarrassment. Tougher laws have to be done. If the child has mental health issues, get them help. But a lot of these kids, they're doing it because they know they get away with it. And unfortunately, they're doing it because of generations. I spent so many people over my 26 years where father, son, mother, daughter, all getting arrested. It just rolls into each other. These laws have to be changed. Thank you.
Just so that you know, because this is something that wasn't mentioned, you know, how does a special session occur? There's two ways. The legislature itself can call itself into special session by 2/3 of both House and Senate signing petitions, or the governor can call us in for a special session. So those are the two ways that it happens. A couple of examples. Right after session ended this past year, the governor called us into special session for the purposes of legalizing recreational marijuana. Also did the same thing for sports betting. And last summer, we were called into special session for the police accountability bill. So that's the procedure, and it has been used.
Good. Is this on? Hello? Great. I just want to follow up on the special session because, you know, we were in session through June, and we were voting on these bills that we didn't have support from many in our caucus on. It has taken all summer, all fall, and up until now of lobbying and working with people who in June did not think there was a problem. We are seeing a problem here in our district. Some other places along Central Connecticut and 995 are. There are some towns that are not. So all of these things that we're doing here, we've been to Glastonbury. I know there was, you know, these forums held around the state. This is all moving the needle. So I know a lot of people, Gabe and Steve especially, are very frustrated. It is very frustrating when you don't have support from your colleagues on something that you're very passionate about. But I have been working on this. Craig has been a leader on this. And I think everyone in this room knows that something needs to be done. How we move forward is what the challenge was. And I think you have seen a presentation from a Republican, a presentation from a Democrat, and our solutions are pretty much in line. So to me, I see hope in making some change sooner rather than later. And it's taken up until this point. Like I said, Craig and I have never seen each other's presentations up until now. So I'm hopeful that we can see change sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Next, we'll call up Valerie Triblets.
Can I put the computer screen down? Is that okay if I close this?
Yeah.
I'm gonna take the mask off. Hi, everybody. Just so you know a little bit about my background, I've spent my entire career working in healthcare facilities, long-term care facilities that specialize in taking people who are what we call hard to place, meaning they've committed crimes, they are severely mentally ill, they have behaviors, they are difficult to manage. I've done this since I was about 25 years old. I'm 57 now. I had a brief break when I had my kids, but I'm back to it now. And I really want to say that the most important thing we need to understand is that even though there are some programs for mental illness, we are not really addressing mental illness in our state or in our country. Anybody who has a child with mental illness or is a family member with mental illness can tell you that when you go to the ER or you seek help, there are not the resources there for you. And I think that is extremely important to understand when we're talking about reopening places where we're housing children like they are criminals. Remember, they are still children. They're not able to vote or drink legally. Yes, they're breaking laws, but they are not developmentally adults. So we need to understand that there's multiple studies you can read anywhere about the impulsivity, the bad decision-making. All of these things are part of the developmental process for children. With that said, I feel that kind of what we're experiencing right now is what we could call a moral panic. I need my glasses for this. A moral panic is a situation in which public fears and state interventions exceed the objective threat posed to a society by an individual or a group who are claimed to be responsible for creating the threat in the first place. So just to give you some examples, the Red Scare, where McCarthy said everyone was a communist, was a moral panic. The whole super predator story that started in the 80s, where there were predictions that juveniles were going to be traveling in wolf packs, which led many people to suspend their feelings of empathy toward young people of color. That was a moral panic. The war on terror, where people blamed Muslims for terrorism. They thought that there were planning attacks in mosques, which led to attacks on Muslim Americans. And the biggie, the war on drugs, which was a political tool, which is widely considered to have led to some of the worst legislative decisions in American history. It was rooted in racism and resulted in the mass incarceration of many people of color. So why am I asking about moral panic? I think that we're experiencing right now. Clearly, we have a problem here. There is no one in this room who is pro-crime. We have a problem. But I'm suggesting right now that perhaps citizens, political leaders, police, and media are using the terms tough on crime or soft on crime, talking about increasing punishments, opening up juvenile detention centers, but forgetting the lessons we've learned about the legislative decisions that we've made in the past that do not consider the root causes and making legislative decisions without thinking about that. Most important, remember, there is always a motive behind moral panic. So who benefits from it? Number one, politicians who want to get reelected or win future elections by attacking other candidates with phrases like soft on crime. Police unions who want to revoke reforms that protect citizens and provide more oversight into police actions. This is a big one, corporations and businesses who lobby. We talked about lobbyists. Well, there's lobbyists for this too. They lobby for harsher sentences and larger prisons and more prisons so they can make more money.
John Rowland, baby.
John Rowland, Remember, the juvenile detention center was part of the reason he went to jail. I'm here tonight to suggest we pay attention to the manipulation that is creating moral panic. Ask our legislators to use the vast amount of information, research, and expert experience available to address juvenile crime without falling back on failed ideas that have been repeatedly proven to do more damage than good. Let's be smart. Let's learn from past mistakes. Let's stand by the citizens of Connecticut who bear the burdens of damaging legislation, people of color, people in cities. Let's put our money, because that's what this is about, our money into people, not prisons.
Hey, yo, you're my speechwriter.
Karen Scott Prescott.
Oh, Fran, you want me to hold it? No. Oh, okay. You got this? Good evening. My name is Corinne Prescott, and I'm going to go through my notes. I am the founder and CEO of Power Up CT, which is a 501c3 grassroots organization. I came to the meeting in South Windsor, and I definitely want to echo everything you said. But I need to start with the truth. And I think I could appreciate Fishbein's presentation if they weren't reiterated word for word at every meeting, including the bogus story of I just spoke to a mom yesterday, because he said the same thing in South Windsor the following week, the same story. I spoke to a mom yesterday and she's asking, what can I do? It's just weird that the night before you have these presentations, you happen to speak to a mom. So I think if we get our politicians to begin starting to tell the truth, that people would receive your information. Just like many people tell me as a Black woman, Corinne, if you lower your tone and less aggressive, white people will be more willing to listen to you. So I'm telling representatives, elected officials, public servants to start telling the truth so we can receive your information a lot better. Next, I would like to say that it was very interesting at the South Windsor meeting that not one elected official came to me to hear more about the program that I am running in what many would consider the housing projects in Manchester. The housing projects in Manchester, I am running a program called Empower You, and the majority of kids in there look like me. They are beautiful Black babies, and they are poor, and many of the parents are unemployed or underemployed. And until we came in, there were a lot of complaints from staff and from residents about kids breaking into the laundry room to hang out because of the pandemic. They closed the community center, they closed the gym, they closed the computer room, and the kids didn't have any resources. We are told, get these vaccines, let's unmask our kids, get back to normal, but y'all don't want to open up the community centers for the kids to hang out in. And since we've been, and Empower You has been in this housing community, there has not been one single complaint from August to December. Not one break-in, not one act of vandalism. And so when I express that I'm operating this program on pennies and that I am cooking dinner myself to feed, we have anywhere from 10 to maybe 30 kids. It's just me and one other person. And we show up and we have family-style dinner. And yesterday we had an epic fail with gingerbread houses, but we had fun. And so when I expressed how I'm having this program and you're talking about solutions, not one elected official came to me and said, hey, can I learn more about your program? Can I learn about the funding for your program? Can I learn how we can expand the funding? How can we expand this program to other communities? Not one came up to me. Not one has emailed me, called me. You can Google me, Keren, Keren Prescott, and I guarantee you'll find me. In fact, when I walked up, Channel 8 knew who I was, even with my mask on. So I just find it funny that you're talking about wanting to address the problems, and when somebody who's from the community is offering real solutions, you don't want to hear from them. Okay. I want to make sure, I don't know how we got from cars being stolen to kids murdering. And I'm not talking about the child who stole a car and hit somebody. It's just like the presentation just went from one thing to another thing. Moral panic. I want to make sure we add mass shootings on there, because I don't see mass shootings up there. And in the last 2 days, both Ellington and Manchester had threats of mass shootings. But for some reason, those not up there, because generally speaking, mass shootings happen in ultra-white, predominantly white communities. So it's not a wonder that we're not talking about mass shootings, even though those are a real thing. And speaking of which, I asked last week, why aren't hate crimes by juveniles up there? I met with a lawyer last week to talk about this thing and to deal with the own hate crime that I was a victim of January 6th. And he said every day he gets a call from places like Fairfield, places like Windsor, places like Farmington, where white children are committing hate crimes every day. But the schools don't call the police. But in Hartford and New Britain, let a kid cuss out a teacher, the police are already in school to arrest them. So I just want to know how come hate crimes aren't on there, because they should be. Those are a real thing. This is my second meeting, and I'll continue to keep coming to them. But I've been watching the Facebook page, and still, there's no people of color ever. You don't know any Black politicians to put on a panel, to hear from other communities, to hear from other people who don't look like you, to add to the conversation? Very interesting. There have been an increase in robberies across the country, especially after the pandemic. And you're like, this is Connecticut, why should I care? You care because, especially in such a desegregated state like Connecticut, the richer are getting richer and the poorer are getting poorer. What is going to happen when people have absolutely nothing and they live in a place like Hartford on Albany Avenue, when they can look across the street and see multi-million-dollar mansions and they're thinking, I'm going to work every day, 40 hours, 50 hours a week, and yet I can't get out of an affordable living housing project? You know what? It's a privilege to pick to live in Rocky Hill. It's a privilege to decide you're going to live in Farmington or Glastonbury or South Windsor. And what I'm finding out from elected officials and people like Brian is that you guys keep voting against affordable housing in your neighborhoods. Why? Why would you want to vote against people having the same opportunity that you have, that you've been afforded? That makes absolutely no sense to me. Not to mention in that program, why does that matter? Because in my Empower You program, I hire the very kids that are generally the ones that we're locking up, 14 and 15. They're too old for after-school program, too young to get a job. I'm hiring them, and our federal minimum wage is not even $15 an hour. I'm hiring 14 and 15-year-olds to be mentors. The same kids that were deemed the problem kids, I'm hiring them. And guess what? They're hitting me up every day. Miss Keren, I got an idea. Miss Keren, I talked to this one. Miss Keren, so-and-so is missing. Can you help us? Miss Keren, we found him. I'm giving you real solutions to real problems, and you don't want anything to do with me or them. That says a lot. Last, but certainly not least, these manufacturing jobs, they sound wonderful. I was part of a fellowship pre-COVID, and in this fellowship, we were talking about opportunity youth, this new thing. Opportunity youth usually are ages of like 17, 18 to 25. And this fellowship I was a part of was put together by United Way. And one of the things they kept talking about, these job programs. Well, if the job programs, I don't know, are in Avon or Simsbury, and we don't have a real public transportation system, and the very people who need those job programs cannot get there because the buses stopped running out here because these are sundown towns. And if you don't know what a sundown town is, Google it, it's free. then how are we going to be able to get these kids to these job programs in order for them to make $60,000, upwards of $90,000 a year? How are we going to be able to get them a car and afford these crazy behind property taxes so they can maintain their car, so they can continue going to the job program and eventually be hired full time? So my frustration is passion. It's pain. It is fatigue. Because time and time again, I am sitting in rooms like this with people who despise the color of my skin. And I am told this isn't about race. Our harsh laws that you're talking about were built on race. Everything this entire country was built on was built off of the backs of my people to ensure a better quality of life for all of you. And am I angry about that? Absolutely not. But what I am angry about is when we start talking about harsher laws, when many of our people are friends with the very insurrectionists who got away with what they did. Many of those people that were at the Capitol performing an insurrection, their friends are sitting on this panel. And if we're going to talk about harsher laws, let's talk about how they got away. Let's talk about how Kyle Rittenhouse was able to get away, but Khalif Browder died in jail. Talk about how Tamir Rice was playing with a toy gun in a playground, 12 years old, and was shot and killed. So if we're going to talk about, if we're going to talk about harsher laws, exactly what she said, who do those harsher laws genuinely affect the most? Because when you can afford top-notch attorneys to get your child out and you are playing golf with the prosecutor and the judge and you are able to make backdoor deals, that is how these kids who live in communities that look like this get away, while kids who live in communities that look like mine have to sit in jail, many times innocent, but can't get out because they can't afford more than a public defender and can't afford the bail. So don't talk to me about harsher laws if you yourselves are not going to ensure that the crimes happening right here in this town are not being handled the same way you want to handle kids that look like me.
All right, I can't really read this next one, but it looks like Kelvin, and then the rest of the last name is in cursive, so I can't quite read it.
Blame it on my mother. She taught me to write really good. But thank you very much. Kelvin Lovejoy. Good evening, everyone. Please remind me not to go on after Ms. Prescott, because it's still smoking and flaming up here, and I thought she said some very powerful words, and I saw some folks that clapped and some folks who didn't clap. I want to thank those who have organized this meeting this evening. This is my first meeting, and I really found it interesting to come here this evening. I live in the city of Hartford, Connecticut. For 30 years, I've been working with what they call at-risk youth. And still today, I work with at-risk youth. I work both in prevention and intervention, and I may talk about that for a few moments. I don't want to take much of your time. I'd like to open up with a quote that Dr. King made while he was quoting Victor Hugo. He said, "When the soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed. But the guilty party is not he who committed the sin, but he who committed or created the darkness." Sir, it's your bedtime, so why don't you watch your mouth?
Okay. I know. What happened?
Really?
Let's keep the peace. Keep the peace.
What was Dr. King saying? Dr. King was saying that things happen. And due to circumstances, as Ms. Prescott was pointing out, many times we don't look at the systemic issues that bring about the causes of the circumstances. Questions like, what causes crime in the first place? And so I live in Hartford, Connecticut, and, you know, one of the neighborhoods that I work in, the annual income is $12,900 annually. What is the impact of poverty
Today, we heard a presentation during a training. We spoke about ACEs. I'm not sure if you're familiar with ACEs, but it's an acronym that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And that a child who has trauma, and when we teach young people, and I've been teaching young people for over 30 years, both in school and out of school facilities. I was a correctional officer 30 years ago, and I saw what it looks like in maximum security prisons. And since then, I've seen what it looks like when young people are also incarcerated. But when it talks about having ACEs, these are the traumas that young people go through, and then those traumas cause them to act out and have behaviors that usually look like crime. Just yesterday, the Surgeon General had an article entitled, "Warning of Youth Mental Health Crisis." Did anybody see that? Yep. Yes, indeed. You should look it up. And then lastly, this last point, because I don't want to take up much of your time, is that we became aware during this pandemic that racism is a public health crisis. We're dealing with some very real.
Can I ask you, how did Rocky Hill vote for that? I'm sure that this town probably 100% supported that. Correct, Mayor? Which one?
It's a good question.
Let Mr. Lovejoy finish.
That's a good question. But what I will say, and I'll depart from here because I'm learning a lot from just listening and observing. I believe that public servants should be at the forefront of making sure that what happens in terms of legislation and laws and policies that get passed support the people. And not just some of the people, but all of the people. So that when we talk about equity and understand what equity is, this is how we teach it with some of our high school students. So there's a ball game going on, and everybody wants to see the ball game. But some have the advantage and the privilege of being able to see over the fence with no problem at all. And then there are those, because of circumstances, they need crates to lift them up to be able to see over the fence and see the ball game. Equity is about giving those who need more resources, need more help, the help that they deserve. Before we criminalize children, let our state look at how we help those who are actually victims acting out because of mental health, because of poverty, and because of this systemic racism that goes on in the state of Connecticut. I look forward to working with groups like this to find solutions. We worked with 42 high at-risk youth in the city of Hartford. We have it documented. We have it documented about the success that we had with them. This month actually marks our 1-year anniversary that I've been working with young men who carry guns, who stole cars, who have been involved in all kinds of delinquent behavior. And we've changed them around. We've put them on a new path. We saw all the drama that they were involved in, and what we went to look for was the trauma that they had been affected by. We can make it happen. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Aurora Corteville.
So I actually didn't realize what I was putting my name on for because I wasn't paying attention.
Do you not want to speak?
Well, actually, now I do have something to say.
All right, go ahead.
I appreciate that everyone who is in this room is still in this room and is listening to what people are saying. And I hope that you are actually hearing what they are saying because it's very important. And I'm white. Most of you are white. You have no idea what it's like to not be white in this country. You have no clue. So please listen.
All right, I'm going to guess on this one too. Sherelle Baines? I'm good. You're good? Okay, all right. Okay. Parish Smith? Parishi? Is it Parishi?
Yes, there it is. You know, I appreciate everything that's happening right now. And I know we think that what we're doing is going to solve the problem, but it's not going to solve the problem. These dudes are dealing with trauma, very complex trauma. And if we throw these dudes in jail, right, they're going to get out, their trauma's probably going to become more complex in jail. They're gonna come right back out and they're gonna steal more of your cars. They're gonna shoot more people, do whatever they do, right? So we need to find ways to address this trauma. This past summer, I worked with 10 of the 42 young people, and many of them, you know, they had ankle bracelets, right? They're juvenile, like they say. Sorry. And you know, after the program, you know, totally different path, totally different thinking. You know, I had a few parents come to me personally, and they were like, "Oh, you know, I don't know what you did in your program, but you know, he thinks totally different. He doesn't want to steal cars no more. He's actually in school. He got a job. So I mean, there's different ways we can look at this. And you know, I think that you know we should all come to something that's again gonna positively affect everybody. Thank you.
I just want to say that, you know, part of the proposal is exactly what you're saying is, you know, I recognize and I've seen these programs work. And part of the problem is that in my experience, we're not getting these kids into these programs quicker. So when a kid is, you know, the case is getting continued a bunch of times, and unfortunately, you know, who they're hanging out with and they're doing stuff and they think, you know, there's not going to be any consequences. I want them to be in a program. You know, when I got arrested for drunk driving in 1986, okay? I was 4 times the legal limit that night, okay? I went through a diversionary program. I took alcohol education. And, you know, I went out with my fellow town council members last night for dinner. They all had a martini, many of them 2. I had a Sprite. I learned through that program that if I'm going to drive home, you don't take the risk. So I know, you know, and that's why the proposal that you saw, you know, I want to look at those diversionary programs. What do they do? Do they work? Because I know some of them work, but maybe not all of them do. So, yeah, I agree. Amen.
I appreciate that, but we need to put a lot more emphasis on it because every year we get funded for about 5 weeks to deal with those children, right? And, you know, do that type of thing and, you know, whatever. But, you know, after that, you know, it's just, you know, we don't have any funding to do anything with them, right? They just go back home and, you know, after the 5 weeks, they return right back to the environments, which Hartford, Albany Avenue, Barber Street, Justin Street, you know, the streets you hear about all the time on the news. You know, I live on Vine, which is about 2 minutes from Barber Street. And, you know, they just go back to those same environments and, you know, we don't have anything to do with them.
And you know, you're one program, right? There's over 100 that we have, you know, various places around the state. I'm sure your program is great. I don't know that all the programs are great. And that's why, you know, when I'm up in Hartford and, you know, Carrie's sitting next to me and we're asking for a report about these programs, please, you know, say amen.
We'll send you a report about the Youth Empowerment Program. As I said, this is our 1-year anniversary. And we believe that proof is the best evidence of what works.
And
We don't mind sending it to you.
I would take that. And the other component to, you know, to all of these programs is the recidivism rate, you know? So you guys don't necessarily know when you got a young man that you've gone through and then they move to New London, whether or not they've gotten arrested again, right? And I want to know that.
Yeah.
So I want the whole thing together.
That's very good. What we see, and especially for, you know, the method that we've been using, is that no matter where that kid goes, if he's a part of our program, he's a part of our family. And that's what we need. We have to stop dealing with children as though they're pets or they're property. The other thing is that adultism is real. And we teach our young people that you too can be great. Indeed, we need to follow the laws and do what needs to be done and get a good education so that we can be productive citizens. understand. Just because we are adults doesn't make us right.
Okay, and we have our last speaker listed as Evilise Loria.
Thank you for pronouncing that correctly. No one ever does. All right, I suck at public speaking, but I wrote a speech. So before I start my speech, I want you guys to test something out. Drive through the north end of Hartford, and when you're there, come to a stop. Go off to a side street. You'll be approached because people will think that you're someone's customer. We see nothing but a never-ending sea of white faces willing to trade drugs for money or guns for money. That's how we get these guns into the community. You can Google Rich Classic. So without suburban cooperation, the drug trade would fail. So that's before I start my speech. My name is Evilise Correa. I'm a former Hartford Community Court employee. My father is a Republican elected official in Hartford who served time for marijuana in the 90s in Connecticut, leaving 4 children to grow up in Hartford alone. I am now the mother of 4 honor roll students who have faced overt racism in their life before 2020. I'm the CFO of BLM 860. It was my brother who was kneeling on the cover of the Hartford Current with the state trooper. I know you all remember that. I've noticed, this is not my first meeting here that I've attended, so I spoke over in South Windsor. But I've noticed that when Connecticut has cut mental health funding or there's been decreased access to mental health services in Connecticut, car thefts have increased. In 2018, when car thefts went down, that directly correlated with a $10 million infusion of federal funds for mental health services in the state. Reopening a taxpayer-funded waste of money such as CJTS, which was already an outdated facility at the time of construction, is nothing more than reopening an embarrassment to our state. John Rowland left a red mark on this state and embarrassed us. Let's let that prison and that era die with the little dignity it has left. As someone who has grown up in the neighborhoods most affected by crime in the failed policies of the Clinton era, we are telling you that you're reducing us to nothing more than the super predators in the eyes of the community, and that is harmful. We require a seat at the table. You don't get to shut us out and scream just because our nightmares touched your perfect suburban existence. We didn't segregate ourselves into the ghetto. The generations of your parents and grandparents did, and we need you to do the right thing. Most of the land in Hartford is not taxable, so that decreases school funding and other funding because of the municipal buildings, nonprofits, and government buildings that continue to shut us out from unemployment. As a result, we have a lower taxpayer base and have to resort to begging the state for money, which, comes limited. And it's always through some stupid nonprofit. The nonprofit industrial complex in Hartford is deep. However, shout out to Power Up actually doing something. We require the same resources as the suburbs, and you have to be willing to meet with people most impacted by these policies. Who better than to tell you what helps than the victims of these crimes that have recently crept into the suburbs? Welcome to the party. This is no longer 1994. We didn't see your faces or the media at any of the many anti-violence rallies and marches until Al Sharpton came in 2015. Then he left and you ignored it again. None of you came to any of the rallies after. This is post-COVID, and our parents were the test subjects of the punitive measures instituted back then, and they failed. But the opiate epidemic has pushed increased mental health services into the suburbs, and it's really helped you guys. So we just want the same. We require a seat at the table and an immediate stop to this rhetoric to scare the public against us. Stop the propaganda and let us tell you what you need to do. My brother shouldn't be profiled in Glastonbury in a Benz over his afro when he went to school to become what he is and is a published anime writer. The same day of the last meeting, I came after someone attempted to steal my car. So if you guys go and look at my steering wheel right now, and you can all go verify, my steering column is broken. Someone did attempt to steal my car. I'm not calling for blood, and you shouldn't either. Instead, we should be looking for solutions. I don't see anyone attempting to address the child sex trafficking on the Berlin Turnpike and calling to lock them up instead. And we all know that's a problem, but we're not talking about it because the perpetrators don't happen to look like me or them over there. So it's mostly white men, and it's mostly children of color. Oh, no, it's mostly you people. You people, white people. So let's just cut it out and no, this is, we need your help. So the generations before us, so your parents and grandparents' generation segregated us into the suburbs. We require your help as a result. If you aren't those people from back then we're going to need more resources. The reason the North didn't have Jim Crow in the first place is because we had redlining. We couldn't move into the suburbs until 1977. You guys take all the jobs, let's be honest, suburbanites take all the jobs in the nonprofits in Hartford, all the hospitals, and then afterwards we have to see you guys at 5 o'clock on the side corners buying drugs and going back home to vote Republican. So it's a little sickening that, neither Democrats or Republicans are really on our side. We have no one in our corners, and let's call it out. We don't bring the guns into the hood. So we don't have the money for that. So it's a lucrative drug trade. And you guys can go test it out for yourselves. I mean, you guys might, I'm not judging. So I'm just saying it is what it is. So the opiate epidemic didn't hit us. But when it hit you guys got mental health services, and all of a sudden Dan Malloy wants to care, and because it's his son. So if we don't want to repeat John Rowland and you guys talk all this crap about Biden and locking people up, then do something, because Dan Malloy sure as hell made your communities look nice when he was pushing, all these policies. You guys got all this therapy, and you guys are calling to lock us up. You want to lock our kids up because we don't have the same resources as you. So we didn't put ourselves in the hood. Our parents didn't put us in the hood. It was the law that did, and we're not the ones that wrote it. So let's even the playing field out a little bit and give us what you have. That's what we require.
Any other representatives or anyone else before we close us out? Okay. You may? Yeah?
My name's Rich Paulich Policio. You're probably wondering why it's Paulich Policio. I'll tell you why. Because of discrimination against the Italians in this town, this state, and throughout the United States. Through my church, I worked very, very intensively in North Hartford through the Christian Activities Council, and it was just changed the name to be more inclusive, the leadership for, anyway, justice and help me. I know I can't either. So I worked intensively in the North End with all the kids in poverty. We had programs. I'm going to stick with the Christian Activities Council. It's on 47 Vine Street. Our programs proved time and time again that if you take these young children, we started in elementary school and follow them through senior high school and keep them in the programs, the 99% of them were very successful. We had an Adventures in the City program, which is an elementary program in the summer. That's why they called it Adventures in the City. Just in 6 weeks, some of these kids went from 3rd grade level reading to 5th and 6th grade in 5 or 6 weeks. So I'm not a social worker or anything, but you have to start with the kids when they're very young. And I will say this, I'm a politician, a lot of people know that, but I'm going to tell you something. I'm very disappointed, and correct me, accept my apologies if I mispronounce your name, Fishbein. There was no reason whatsoever to mention how many Democrats voted for a tough crime bill. And how many didn't vote is more. There was no reason in the world to put that on the screen or even mention it. I'm a strong Democrat. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Well, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. We certainly appreciate it. We appreciate state lawmakers with all of the information, those who came out to support, those who came from other communities to share your stories with us. We do still very much appreciate that, and we do look forward to finding a solution. We will do